to tape from the mountains of West Virginia.
Are you curious about the unknown, the unexplainable? Do you find yourself intrigued by the mysterious and paranormal side of our world? Join us on an adventure into the world of inexplicable discoveries and investigations that may someday give us a final answer as to what may be behind the veil of reality. Then it's time to turn your pods up, because we're live to tape from the mountains of West Virginia. It's time once again for Let's Find Out with co-host Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
Live to tape from the mountains of West Virginia, it's another episode of Let's Find Out with co-host Diego. Thank you for taking this journey with me. On this episode of Let's Find Out, picture this: New York City in the alternate version year of 1899. Thomas Edison proclaims that he has an invention called the Spirit Phone, model SP1. It was marketed and released to the general public, but the device doesn't work quite as advertised. When insanity and suicide occurs amongst the users, two unlikely individuals, occultist Aleister Crowley and inventor Nikola Tesla, join forces to investigate. We will dive into the novel of the Spirit Phone, all this plus more. Please welcome to Let's Find Out a new and good friend to our show, author Arthur O'Keefe. Arthur, my friend, thank you for joining us here on Let's Find Out. I've been looking forward for this interview for a couple of months now.
It's great to be here, and thank you very much for having me on the program.
Of course, and you know it's interesting because on the pre-show we were talking. There's three elements to this book that are very interesting that you put together. So we're talking about Aleister Crowley, we're talking about Nikola Tesla, and of course Thomas Edison. I'm gonna get a little too ahead of myself, but for the inspiration of the Spirit Phone, which is available through BHC Press. Earlier, we talked about Edison's rumored device to contact the dead. Now, was this such a thing, or was it one of those rumors or got away somehow in the public in order to maybe promote his works down the road, or did it not really happen at all?
Well, there's a grain of historical truth to it. The way I got the idea for the novel was back in 2009, I'd been kicking around some ideas. I wanted to write a book. And I had some copies of this series of books. I think you may well be aware of them. The Mysteries of the Unknown series, published by Time Life Books. I think they came out with like 33 volumes in the late 80s, early 90s. And in the volume about ghosts, there was a chapter about the so-called Edison Spirit Phone. So Edison actually did claim that in an interview in 1920 with B.C. Forbes, the founder of Forbes magazine, that he was trying to develop a device that could be used to communicate with the dead. And then later, Edison was requested by Scientific American to give an interview to expand a little bit on this. And Edison himself never called it a spirit phone or anything else. And there's no extant plans, equipment, or anything like that. But the claim by Edison is the reality. The other stuff as to whether he actually built it is, at the very least, a big question mark. But when I'd read about it, I thought, well, that could be a novel. And then it went from there. And then I thought Aleister Crowley and Nikola Tesla should be the protagonists, because I saw them as being two figures of the time who were, I guess, a bit larger than life in certain ways, and a bit of an oil and water combination, a kind of speculative fiction odd couple, so to speak.
No, just of course, to say the least. Now, I mean, I could understand the whole Nikola Tesla and Edison part of it, but you surprised me. I'm sure you surprised the listeners when you bring in Aleister Crowley. With that being said, when you did your research on Crowley, was this something you had interest in his history in the past, or was it just something simply for this novel?
Well, I'd already had a certain interest in Aleister Crowley as well as Nikola Tesla, both as historical figures. And so I'd already been reading about them. I didn't really have the idea of trying to put them in a novel. And when the idea for fictionalizing the spirit phone concept struck me, then Tesla and Crowley, I'd already been reading about for years, sort of came to me as the possible protagonists. And so, because I see the spirit phone itself as, of course, a technological device, but it's also involved with the occult. So I came up with the idea of having Crowley and Tesla sort of combine their respective skills in the occult and technology to investigate the origins of the spirit phone.
Yeah, because for those, at least when I grew up in the '70s and '80s with Crowley, it was kind of a, for some reason the subject came about when, especially when hard rock and metal was pretty popular in the '80s, and Ozzy did a song called Mr. Crowley, and
Yeah.
it's a great song. I really like it. And then if we go back, I think it was in the '60s when the Beatles released the Sgt. Pepper album. There's a lot of
Mm.
cast of characters on that in that album, and a preacher pointed out, I forgot who it was, that they actually had Aleister Crowley on the cover. Or is that, do you know anything about that, or
What,
was it Aleister?
which album was this? Sorry.
Sergeant Pepper's?
Oh, yes,
Oh yeah.
yes. He is. He's on the cover. He's kind of in the upper left. I think he's next to Mae West. And the BBC News has a kind of web page devoted to the Sergeant Pepper album, and it's called the title is Sergeant Pepper Meet the Band, and they have these close-ups and circles of all the different people, Edgar Allan Poe and Karl Marx, whoever, and it includes Aleister Crowley. I think that it's from a picture about like 1930 or something.
Do you think, and of course, opinions with this, was there something that maybe, because I know the Beatles kind of got a little bit away from the traditional look and the traditional sound. I don't really think they were delving too much into the occult, but it's just kind of weird to have him on the cover. Is there something related? Do you know, do the Beatles have a connection with this guy, or?
Not that I'm aware of, though. There are rumors. For example, in the Sergeant Pepper album, the very first line of the title song, "It was 20 years ago today, Sergeant Pepper taught the band to play," and the album was released in 1967. 20 years before that, Aleister Crowley died. So some people claim that has it's like a Crowley illusion. Um, I guess the more prominent rock and roll connections, which I'm sure you must know about, are like Jimmy Page, who bought Crowley's former house in Scotland, Boleskine House near Loch Ness, and of course Ozzy Osbourne with the song "Mr. Crowley."
Yeah, because it was almost like the worst thing you could back then. It was for some reason it was brought about, like it was like rediscovered again. Crowley, I don't know what they called it back then. I'm sure they gave it a label to some Crowleyism or whatever. So, and the reason I really talked about Aleister Crowley right now is because the I would say the ingenious idea of including him in this book. When you research more about Crowley, did anything jump out at you? Were you a little creeped out with the stuff that he did, or was it maybe that it was overhyped, his involvement with the occult, or maybe he wasn't as bad as people made him out to be?
Well, as far as the aspects of Crowley that I was using for the book, it was in 1899 when he was 23 years old. So I used the actual, Crowley at the time. And as the 20th century began, he founded a religion called Thelema, which I really didn't delve into. It still exists today. At least one major Crowley biographer, Richard Kaczynski, is an adherent of this religion, for example. And but I didn't really delve into that too much because it wasn't relevant to what I was trying to do with the novel. And I don't think it was what I put in the novel about Crowley is all historically accurate because it's fiction. So my approach was that, and I assume it's the same for anybody that writes a novel based partly on historical points, is okay, I've done some research, I have the history, what am I going to use and what am I going to kind of put aside and replace with completely fictional stuff. So I've got Crowley teleporting, I've got Crowley levitating up the side of Devil's Tower in Wyoming, which I don't think the real Crowley could do, for example. As far as how sort of evil he was, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that on the one hand, I think Crowley liked basking in the limelight. He liked the public attention and being thought of as this sort of dark, sinister figure. But on the other hand, there was a lot of stuff said about him in the press, especially in the 1920s, which is objectively false. For example, there was an article published claiming that he was forcing women into prostitution in Italy, and that he had been in prison in the United States for human trafficking, which is not true. He was never in prison for any reason at all. For example, he was also, he claimed that he was a spy for British intelligence during World War I when he lived in New York. And there is evidence to support this, I think. I think the best explanation personally is that he was a kind of asset. I think that was the term used by another biographer. No, I'm not a biographer, but a biographer of Crowley. I cannot remember who. So he was kind of like a bit of an agent at large for British intelligence, and they were in contact with him. But anyway, Crowley was in New York writing pro-German propaganda. This is during World War I, before the U.S. entered the war. And Crowley claimed later that his purpose was to infiltrate the German propaganda machine in America and write these really crazy, over-the-top, vicious, anti-Allies, pro-Germany articles in order to provoke, extremely hostile actions by Germany, and to sort of, he was actually trying to discredit Germany, he said. Now, the thing is, he's called a traitor, but at the same time, he returned to England. He was never arrested for treason. He was never put on trial for anything like that. So I think, that aspect of him as a traitor was also exaggerated. He's been accused of, I think, a lot of evil stuff he didn't really do. At the same time, I think he could be a difficult personality, that in his personal relationships, he could be a little too kind of mean to people. If he thought a personal relationship wasn't personally useful to him, he would just, say goodbye. Suddenly he could be maybe a bit rude, a bit arrogant, that kind of thing. He wasn't always a nice person to get along with, probably.
No, but I could probably understand, but being labeled certain things as for those crimes that he didn't even had nothing to do with, that could probably make somebody kind of bitter, especially if he feels maybe people are trying to be friendly towards him just to catch him on something,
Yeah. Well, I think another aspect of this too was that Crowley was using the present day term bisexual. And the thing is, Oscar Wilde, around the same time, early 1900s, was imprisoned under the sodomy law, or whatever it was called in Britain at the time. So there is an idea proposed maybe by, I don't remember, maybe Marco Passi, who has written, an academic who's written on Crowley, perhaps, that one of the reasons Crowley didn't really try to go after people in court too strongly who had, criticized him or accused him falsely of criminal activity was that if it came to a trial, then his, what were considered to be illicit sexual practices at the time would have come out in court, and he could have wound up in prison under the same law that imprisoned Oscar Wilde. So that could have been one of the reasons he, was hesitant to take up litigation against people.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely understand that because being to the court system back then may not have been as on the up and up as it would have
Yeah.
been. I guess nowadays we would say the same thing, but I think it would have been harder back then because I think it was a little more uber religious times, I guess you could say.
Yes, definitely. Well, Crowley himself grew up in a very religious household, and his parents were part of a sect known as the Plymouth Brethren, and I believe they had some maybe tangential relation with maybe the Quakers, but anyway, they were a very particular sect, and he was raised in a very strict kind of religious household, and he felt sort of repressed, and maybe his later dabbling in the occult and everything was a kind of a rejection or a rebellion against what he felt was, severely in a severely oppressive environment. And incidentally, he was acquainted with the Irish poet W.B. Yeats, and they hated each other. Apparently, they were both members of the Order of the Golden Dawn, and an occult society that Crowley joined in the late 1890s. And there was a bit of a power struggle, and Crowley, well, to make a long story short, Crowley left them. But yeah.
When you came up with the concept and you released the book, how has been the feedback? Only because I asked because of those three elements you have in the book. I would imagine that some people would be, why Crowley? Why Nikola Tesla? Reading the reviews so far has been pretty positive.
Yes, I'm happy to have gotten some good critical responses it's been reviewed by like Nightmare Magazine, or in Japan, the Japan News here, which is the English language publication of the, I don't want to get this wrong, maybe the Yomiuri Shimbun, I think, the Yomiuri newspaper. Yeah. And so yeah, I'm happy about that. And I guess the putting Crowley and Tesla together in fiction, I don't know of anybody else that's done that. I think that might be the distinctive parts. There have been a few other books using the Edison spirit phone idea in fiction, but the Edison plus Crowley plus Tesla plus the spirit phone, I think, is only my book has that. And so yeah, and Crowley strikes me as this sort of, especially at 23, at the time the story is set, this very hedonistic, kind of cheeky guy who likes to kind of tease people. And and Tesla is rather a bit uptight, a bit eccentric, a bit straight-laced. And so I thought of them together. They, as far as anybody knows, they never met, but if they did, how would they interact? So I tried to make the interaction between the hedonistic occultist and the eccentric, uptight inventor to be a point of, sometimes I was trying to go for a bit of humor in that, and the way so there's a bit of tension between them. Yeah. So they're the two main ones. Edison is actually more of a supporting character, though he does show up a bit.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. You are the first person to put all these elements together in one book, so that's awesome.
Nice.
Let me bring this up real quick because it's
Sure.
very, very impressive. So the ebook edition of the Spirit Phone, it reached Barnes and Noble's bestseller status in 2023.
Yes. Yeah, it was up there for, it was in the top 100 for, I don't know, a few days. And yeah, it peaked at number 16, so I was very happy.
And then it was narrated by a two-time Emmy Award winner Daniel Pence. Now, how did this come about? Because this helped him earn a nomination for Best Voice Actor in 2023 for the Voice Arts Awards. And I mean, that's absolutely awesome. How did you manage to grab the
snag such a
attention?
great narrator?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was arranged by the publisher BHC Press, and they I think put out a call for I guess either applications and or auditions, and they arranged for the narration. And yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, his previous narration work got him 2 Emmys, and yeah, the Spirit Phone itself, it's in the, let's see, in the category of audiobook narration science fiction best voiceover for the 2023 Voice Arts Awards. I think the winners are going to be announced in December, but his narration is so versatile, so impressive, and it feels like there's a cast of different actors rather than a single person. He's got such a great repertoire of voices. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly how they got him, but I'm glad they did.
So normally when interviews start, most people say, "Hey, so how did you get started? Where as an author and going on?" But if we're to go back to the Wayback Machine, from when you started to the Spirit Phone, I know it's a long career and can you give us a snapshot of how that looked like?
Well, as for writing itself, for my teens, I was writing stuff, either ideas for articles, ideas for fiction, but I never made any serious attempt at getting anything published. I didn't feel confident enough that it was really good enough. And then the first time I did anything remotely resembling published writing was this friend of mine, Peter Siddell, who's from England, and he's, excuse me, quite a talented comedian. And he and I were working together at an English school in Japan. And he walked into the break room and said, I'm supposed to do this street interview, but I got to go on holiday. So can somebody else do it? And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And it was for the Japan Times, which is the largest English language daily in Japan. So I did a few street interviews, and I kept in touch with the editor, this guy named Ben Stubbings, who's the editor at the time, he was the community page editor at the Japan Times. So a few years later, I had an idea for a full-blown article. And so then I got it published, and then I started writing articles for the Japan Times and some other magazines and news sites. And then I started writing, short stories for publication. And then it was in 2009 that the idea for the Spirit Phone hit me. And then for the Spirit Phone, for the first 3 weeks, I was like writing the legal pads. Okay, what are the plot lines? Who are the characters and all this? And then for 10 years, about on and off, I was doing research and writing. And then finally, I got a lot of encouragement from another writer named Patrick Parr. And he's making quite a name for himself as a nonfiction author. He did a slice of life biography of Martin Luther King Jr. He wrote a book about the 1968 Notre Dame Literary Festival. So he gave me a lot of encouragement and advice on how to make the manuscript happen, right? And he's in the acknowledgments. I'm really indebted to him. So that was so it was from 2019 that I made writing the Spirit Phone like an everyday occurrence and began sending out queries to publishers and so on.
And I'm looking at the cover of the Spirit Phone.
Oh yeah,
it's a beautiful cover. It's very simple, but it's right down to the point. It's like I said, it's beautiful. Who came up with the concept of the cover? Is that something that was the idea in your mind, or is that something that the publisher kind of showed to you? Hey, choose amongst these covers.
It was the publisher's decision, and at BHC Press, which is run by a husband and wife team, Vernon Firestone and Joni Firestone. Vern does the covers, among other things, and the symbols along the left and right there are the planetary symbols for the metals that are used in the Spirit Phone, like gold and Mercury and so on. And the triangular images at the top represent, I believe, earth, air, fire, water, kind of alchemical symbols. And I believe the kind of monstrous looking faces at the very top of the cover are a kind of concept of the Ferox Phasma, who are these kind of evil entities. I didn't actually think of them in this particular way, but it's kind of maybe allegorical. But yeah, I also love the cover. I think it's very well done. I was very happy with it.
Yes, and this being your debut novel, correct?
Oh, yes.
So what's next in the works for you? Because I know sometimes it just doesn't stop with one book. The ideas keep coming, so you're gonna eventually start putting pen to paper, unless you're already doing it already. And I'm just jumping ahead of myself here.
Well, actually, I have been working on a second book, and it's been a little bit of a slow going. I've been doing a lot of research, writing ideas, trying to make up the manuscript, but I'm not sure when it's going to be done. But I am working on it. I've got like a box full of notebooks with ideas and stuff I've printed out. So and we'll see how it goes. But my current project at the moment, it's a very different thing from the Spirit Phone. It's not even fiction. I'm co-authoring an English punctuation style guide for a Japanese publisher, and I've gone into this kind of punctuation rabbit hole where I have to learn the finer points about hyphenation and semicolons and so on. And that'll be published next year, probably. It's like a kind of reference guide. I'm also working on a short story right now that I hope to find a home for soon.
All right, and not to spoil it, because I don't like spoiling anything. Just like movies, TV
Oh,
shows. Can you give us can you dangle the carrot in front of us? Let us know what's
oh,
coming up. Yeah.
sure. For the Spirit Phone sequel, well, what I'm working on is, for example, Crowley and Tesla actually lived in New York City at the same time during World War I. Tesla had already been living there since the 1880s, and Crowley lived there just pretty much during the war years and a little bit after. And interestingly, they had a mutual acquaintance in a German-American poet named George Sylvester Verreck. And Verreck is a very interesting person in that he was this kind of rock star of American letters at a very young age. He was greatly celebrated, a household word, and then he suddenly fell out of favor and went into obscurity partly because he supported the German cause during World War I in America, and then later during World War II he supported the Nazis. And Mark J. Safer, who is one of the preeminent biographers of Nikola Tesla, points out that Verreck himself really was not an anti-Semite, and he tried to do these kind of mental acrobatics where he tried to detach the Nazi anti-Semitism from Nazism somehow, which, doesn't work. But anyway, Verreck wound up getting imprisoned later. This is like after the period I'm talking about, but he was doing some unauthorized contact with Nazi-related the government's members of the Nazi government of Germany, I think, during World War II. So he was imprisoned for 5 years. But anyway, Verreck was an acquaintance, an associate of both Tesla and Crowley, and yet somehow it doesn't look like he ever introduced them. And I wrote an article about this for Pop Matters, an online magazine, and it's interesting to think about why. Richard Spence, who wrote a book about Crowley's spy work called Secret Agent 666, has hypothesized that maybe Crowley and Tesla did meet, but I personally don't see any evidence of that. So I want to set part of the book in New York again in World War I and get Crowley and Tesla together again.
Well, you successfully did it with the Spirit Phone. Now, for the listeners of Let's Find Out who want to know more about your works and, of course, order their copy of the Spirit Phone, what's the best way they can do that?
Okay, well, if you go to my website, arthurokeefe.net, ARTHUROKEEFE.net, and then you just click the Spirit Phone, and then on the page you can see the words BHC Press, and then you click that link, click BHC Press, and then that brings you straight to the book page of the Spirit Phone. You can also simply go to bhcpress.com. Yeah, you can find it there. Not just my book, but plenty of books. If you bhcpress.com. They're an independent publisher based in Michigan, and the book's available in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and of course, audiobook, narrated by Emmy Award-winning narrator Daniel Penz.
Hell yeah, he does. Now, I would definitely like to take this moment during the show to thank those folks at BHC Press for making this interview possible. When I sent out the email asking for permission to contact you, and they put us both together, so I really appreciate them for doing that, and I appreciate you for coming on the show. And I always like to ask my wonderful guests, once that next book comes out, if you'd be willing to come back on Let's Find Out, and we'll talk about that book.
I would love to. Thank you very much for having me on the program.
Sure, anytime, my friend. This has been another excellent episode of Let's Find Out with co-host Diego. Please check us out on all our social media pages as well as on our YouTube channel, and we're also on Rumble. Like, share, and subscribe. Also, our merch is live and ready to go. Please visit the Facebook page for more information on how to get a hold of these shirts and caps. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Until next time, my friends.
Thank you for listening to Let's Find Out with co-host Diego. We're on Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, Pocket Casts, and on Anchor. For more information about Let's Find Out with co-host Diego, please visit us on Facebook.com/co-host Diego, on Twitter at co-host_Diego, and on Instagram as co-host Diego. Copyright co-host Diego. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of co-host Diego and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, co-host Diego, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out is provided on an as-is basis with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.
Moonlight Monster Media presents the Steeds Ridge DVDs, Steeds Ridge posters, stickers, Moonlight Monster Media mugs, and Moonlight Monster Media t-shirts.